very much indeed for joining us. Well, with me now is Bruce Klingner, former CIA Deputy Division Chief for Korea, who is now at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you very much for joining me. I know you don't like this summit. I know you don't like the communique. But why don't you think North Korea is going to deliver on its promises?
Well, there's the cynicism born of 8 failed agreements previously with North Korea. And the administration had hinted that North Korea was coming around to the not only the U.S. proposal, but the UN-required CVID, complete, verifiable, irreversible dismantlement. But we didn't see any of that in the communique. The communique, the 4 main provisions were in previous agreements, and actually in the previous agreements they were stronger, a bit more expansive, and the key provision on denuclearization was actually stronger in the September 2005 6-party talk statement. So I thought it was quite disappointing that it was a fairly thin skeleton.
But this was never going to be the grand deal. Hasn't it, at the very least, eased tensions to give negotiators breathing room to do the real work?
Well, it has, but as President Trump said, well, we're not hearing sea of fire or fire and fury, but the sea of fire, we hadn't been hearing North Korean threats for some time, and then it was actually the U.S. Perhaps thinking of a preventive attack, which was raising the tension this year. So in a way, both sides have stepped back. But just as before, North Korea would raise tension and then get credit for lowering it, in a way, the U.S. was the one that raised the tension, and now the president is looking to get credit for lowering the tension there.
So what can the U.S. do at this point to regain the upper hand? Well,
what we need to do is sort of pursue things as we did with arms control treaties with the Soviet Union. The problem with all the previous agreements and this current communique is that they're very short, they're very vague, they don't clearly delineate in great detail all the definitions and the requirements, and then having sufficient and robust verification. The arms control treaties with the Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact had both very detailed agreements and very robust verification. So we need to move towards that, putting a lot of meat onto this skeleton to clearly have North Korea identify or embrace the UN view of what denuclearization is, what the Korean Peninsula is. They've been maintaining their own view, which is quite different from the rest of the world.
One of the more startling declarations actually came after the summit, when President Trump said the military exercises would end. The fact that South Korea didn't know about this, what does that tell you?
Well, it shows it was a bit of an ad lib. South Korea, Japan, the Pentagon, and apparently U.S. Forces Korea were all caught unaware. So there may be a case of walking back what the president said, but the last several years North Korea has been floating an idea of a freeze for a freeze. They would not do nuclear and missile tests in return for the U.S. and South Korea not doing exercises. Washington and Seoul correctly rejected that because North Korea is not allowed to do those tests, whereas we're allowed to do our exercises. What it seems now is that the U.S. has embraced half of that freeze, and we didn't even get in return the freeze of the nuclear and missile tests.
But just how big a concession was it really?
Well, I think it is a significant one, because military experts and military personnel will tell you if you don't train, you're degrading the Allied deterrence and defense capability, which is there to defend against the North Korean threat.
Bruce Klingner, as always, thank you very much for coming in. Okay, a quick look at some of the day's other news now. And a gunman who had taken 2 people hostage in central Paris has been arrested.